I hope you all know by now that I am a sucker for a good metaphor and analogy. And so one of the things that I love about this episode is we were able to use this imagery of fire, which is something that I use when I talk about community. It's why my business is called Ember. But in this episode, we talk about what do you do when that fire turns against you? And our guest, Andrea, talks about 3 really fabulous tools for firefighting, essentially, in your community and ways that you can address it. And I think this episode really doesn't shy away from the emotional labor that we take on as community managers, but it also provides some really practical tools from someone who has absolutely earned all the wisdom that they have to share in this podcast episode. So enjoy. Welcome to Dear Bree, an advice column for community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. This season of Dear Bree is sponsored by our friends over at Heartbeat. Heartbeat is an all-in-one community platform, and it's the one I chose to host my own community. Your members can finally have events, conversation, content, and even courses in one distraction-free, intimate, customized home. I chose Heartbeat for 3 reasons. First, Heartbeat is unparalleled in their events management features. Events are a core part of my community architecture, and their features make my life so much easier. Second is segmentation. It's super easy to break my community into smaller, more niche subgroups and create a more customized experience for that group in Heartbeat. And finally, their courses. Being able to host my educational materials and learning journey in a community-first platform makes my community that much more valuable and retention that much stickier. I'm an affiliate with Heartbeat, which means when you sign up through my link in the show notes, I get paid a small amount at no extra charge to you. Thank you for supporting my work in that way. And finally, I usually record this podcast from Hawaii Island, so a special thank you to the Kanaka Maoli people on whose land I currently reside. Our episode today deals with a toxic community member who is stirring up trouble to revolt against the community manager. Raise your hand if you've been there. And to help us break open this dilemma today, I have with me a seasoned veteran of the community spaces, Andrea Middleton. A little bit about Andrea. Andrea is a veteran community organizer who loves finding paths to productive and powerful collaborations with opinionated and skeptical communities, which is perfect for our letter today. She spent 10 years working in community efforts in the WordPress open source project and joined Reddit in 2021. The last 3 years at Reddit, she's had a lot of exciting moments, as I'm sure you would, including working with mods and communities through the API protests this last summer. In her spare time, she loves reading sci-fi and fantasy, cooking, drinking fine wine, and goofing off with her teenagers. Andrea, thank you again for joining us for this episode.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, as this is a podcast about community conundrums, fiascos, and drama, we like to shed light on some of the messiest things that happen. Do you have any tea from your own experience that you'd be willing to kick us off with?
Oh my goodness, so many mistakes and so much drama over the many years of doing this work. I immediately think of one example where my very first year of doing community work way back in 2011, and this is really almost before the community professional kind of job was a job. So I had come from a background of doing a little bit of sales and a little bit of teaching and a little bit of marketing and a little bit of activism and just walking happily into this role that no one really well defined. And I was responsible at the time for enforcing a pretty controversial policy about event sponsorships in the WordPress project. And at the time, where WordPressers like to complain and argue about community issues was on Twitter. And there was this big fight going on about, these rules are bad. No one should have to follow them. Oh, no, they're good. We don't understand them. And I got wrapped up in the emotion of it all. And so I'm just bravely waded into this debate with some really frivolous comments that not only didn't settle down the argument, but actually extended the argument and took it in an even less productive direction.
No.
Yeah. And of course, my manager at the time, who was training me in this work, was just so exasperated with me. And in retrospect, I was so embarrassed, but I really got swept away with some of that. People are wrong on the internet. They just don't understand. And did then what I have learned since never to do, which is engage in a debate or an argument or a conflict without having any plan or strategy in place. We make those mistakes so that we learn. And I have learned my lesson for sure.
Sometimes those hardest lessons are the best ones in the long run because they really shape how you move forward. And I think that's so relatable. I think we've all, whether you're a community manager or not, we've all probably made mistakes publicly on the internet that if you existed on Facebook in high school, you made mistakes that you regret openly on the internet. So it's very relatable. And I'm really curious to hear, actually, maybe I can ask you here, like, what are some of those strategies that you have, especially in those escalated scenarios where it sounds like there's a lot of emotion involved and like you feel personally attacked, or I don't know. In those scenarios, I'm thinking for myself where I come up with like the perfect zingy response. And I'm like, just wait, this will get them. Like when you're in that frame of mind, what are some of the things that you tell yourself or tell your team to bring it back down?
Yeah, I have actually made the concept of conflict de-escalation almost a cornerstone of my community profession and the way I approach the work. I think largely because my foundational experience is in WordPress, and all of your community work in open source projects are all public. So you have to do all the work in public all the time, which means it's remembered forever. It's archived forever. And so like your mistakes haunt you for a long time. And also if you're any good, you get smart quick. And I think also like open source projects and in many ways, online communities that like we see on Reddit exist in this space where conflict is a feature, not a bug. Right. And so I think a lot of community managers struggle a little bit with the concept of conflict as being that they need to tamp down conflict instead of lean in to what conflict actually provides, which is an opportunity to find the friction points of community members and learn what does belong in a community and what doesn't belong in a community. And so one of the things that my community work has taught me is that conflict is actually something that can move the community forward in a way. And so to try to shut stuff down right away is generally completely the wrong way to go. That said, there are some conflicts that are not productive. And so the first thing I always encourage people to do when they're thinking about, oh crap, people are mad, now what? I think about it as there's a fire, right? It might be a dumpster fire, the house might be on fire, something's on fire. And there are 3 ways to fight fire. You fight fire with fire, you fight fire with water, and you fight fire with a vacuum. All 3 of those options are very viable, but you want to pick carefully what matches the situation. And so often what I did back in the day is I fought fire with like magnesium or something. It's like, oh, you know what? Let's get some gasoline. That would be fantastic.
You grabbed your leaf blower and you were like, this is going to help.
Here I come, friends. Do not recommend fighting fire with accelerant, but sometimes the best thing to do is to wade in and have that good trouble that we learn about from our colleagues in activism. Sometimes the best way is to go in and calm it all down and put out the fire. And sometimes the best way is to ignore the fire and let it suffocate itself.
That's such a helpful tool. I'm really excited to hear how you might apply that to this letter. And before I dive into that, I had a couple different thoughts come to mind. One is the name of my community consulting business is Ember. It's the dark side of the fire that can be started in community. But I use embers as this analogy for community. And that's why it's such a powerful tool, especially for businesses, because I love the idea that any common item can be turned into this mechanism that ignites other things. And how when your community members, especially when they're gathered, how that heat builds and it grows. And if you've been building community for any length of time, you also know how destructive it can be. And those fires can also turn against you. They can spread like wildfire in a good way, or there can be fires in your community that are destructive. So I'm so on board for this analogy. My other thought is I'm getting so excited because I think this really aligns what you're saying about entering into the conflict and seeing it as an opportunity, seeing it as a feature, seeing it as something to almost partner with in your community is the essence of what I want to do with this podcast. What I want to promote and the conversations that I want to have here are the ones in the midst of the conflict, like the ones with the craziest scenarios, the worst dramas, the messiest places. Those are the places we as community managers need to embrace. And we need to be willing to step into those places. Number one, because I think we need to normalize some of the craziness that happens there because it is happening regardless of whether or not we talk about it. And number two, like the more we do talk about it, the more tools we have for how to address the situation. And for me, it's creating calm through the chaos. I'm curious if you have your own little spin on it of what the outcome is from the conflict, but I'm very excited for how this episode is going to go.
Me too. What fun.
All right. Are you ready for the letter I have prepared for you?
I am. Let's hear it.
All right. Dear Bree, I'm currently the community manager for models for an adult content platform. I mainly took it because I wanted to help and work with women. There's one model that seems unhappy with me, mostly because she doesn't get what she wants and tries to put me down. She wants special treatment, doesn't want to accept our rules, is not willing to follow the workflows we have. She's always right and has an excuse for everything. We're always wrong, and she seems to have it out for me in particular. Many women in the community already warn me about her, and they also don't want to participate in the community because of her. The thing is, she's a great performer and earns a lot. Unfortunately, we can't just block her. There has to be a big issue for her to be blocked. She got a warning for something, and I had 3 days of terror, even though it wasn't even my decision to create the warning. I don't know what to do with her. She keeps trying to tell me, you're new, and that's why you don't know. And now she's starting to publicly hint that I'm not good. Before she did it in my DMs, as well as the old community manager's DMs, saying things like, this new girl does no shit. Ooh. Any tips on how to work with someone like that? In any other community, I would have already thrown her out, but I can't. Help. This makes me unhappy because it feels like I have to fight a war I never started and also don't want. I want to help, but I feel stuck. Signed, Toxic Member in Toronto.
Woo!
You feel that heat. Talk about starting fires.
And I know that feeling, that kind of having that one person where when they show up in the community, your heart just sinks, right? And you're just like, oh God. And you're just like, your pulse gets fast and you start breathing heavy and you're like, ah. And all of a sudden you're full of these images of, oh, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. I really felt for this person saying I had 3 days of terror when we had to give her a warning. It's so, so hard when you have this much kind of emotion wrapped in to your work with people. And that's community work, man. Like you can't have people without emotions unless someone is doing community management on Vulcan or somewhere in the Star Trek universe that I don't know about. So yeah, this is a situation that like a lot of people face. Like that one toxic community member, they have maybe relatively few contributions or even a lot of contributions, but give 20% of your value, but take 80% of your time. And it's really hard to manage. So I have a lot of empathy. It jumped out to me that this community member is trying to weaken the letter writer's position in their work. That really jumps out at me because any manager of community managers should be ready for this tactic. So my hope would be that this person's boss has already had to weather those accusations of like, your community manager is not good at her job or whatever, and already knows how to handle that. But if that's not the case, this is a foundational requirement for anyone doing community work. You have got to make sure that you are aligned with your manager, that your boss is aligned with the work that you are doing, they're aligned with your priorities, and that as much as possible, you're working out in the open, right? So that insinuations of incompetence, be they from community member to community member or from community member to your boss, are really easy to refute. So as much as possible, keep your work out there in the open rather than getting driven into private spaces where it'll be hard for your manager to see what you're doing and for other community members to look at what somebody else is saying and be like, that doesn't match what's out here public and easy to find. So that's a place where working out in the open can be actually an immense stabilizing and protective factor, right? Because it's going to be real hard to lie about someone's work if everyone can see that work.
I love that tip. So not getting drawn or dragged into the DMs into private spaces, which I could see a lot of early on community managers actually like really wanting to do that because you're like, okay, let's just solve this like really quietly over here on the side. But especially once a member has like reached this kind of level of toxicity, like that's more of a trap. That's actually not where this is going to be resolved. And you should probably keep your work as open as possible to build credibility, both to your management team, but also to your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're addressing public issues in private, you have to then circle back and address those public issues in public too. Because as we all know, any behavior we permit and accept in any group becomes the new default acceptable behavior in that group. So if this person is grandstanding and behaving in ways that do not match the norms of your community, you have to address it publicly. Otherwise, everyone will go down to her level eventually. And that's my next question here is, do we have a strong code of conduct in place for this community? Because that is foundational. You're not going to be able to accomplish anything as far as enforcing behavioral norms or expectations until you have a nice, clear code of conduct that includes what the rules are or expectations. I really like expectations. I don't like the term guidelines. It's too fuzzy. So go with rules or expectations if you don't want to be really top down. And then be careful to make sure that you're clear on how those rules or expectations will be enforced and why they exist. So it can't just be like, do this or else, but also this is why these exist, right? And so then when you're pulling people into the aspiration of the behavior you're looking for, you get to say things like, we do this so this is a welcoming space for everyone. And so then if anyone comes at you and is, but I don't want to do that, then you're like, well, are you with us in creating a welcoming space for everyone? If you're not, then that equation gets very simple, right? Almost doesn't matter how much you earn because you've already said, I don't care about anyone in this community but me, right? And so a little bit of that is fighting fire with fire, right? Because you're meeting someone where they are and saying, this is the effect your behavior is having. These are our norms. This is what we're building toward. Are you with us or are you not with us? And giving them the opportunity to say, I'm not with you. I don't care about anyone but myself. And then the PR game is nice and simple.
This is the like challenger in me. I love those conversations where because you have the values already determined of what this community is for, the spirit of the community, And when you have those expectations really clearly outlined, like that conversation actually becomes not easy, but more simple in that this is what we are for in this space. Your behavior is indicating that you're looking for something else. And we hope you find that. Love to support you in finding that somewhere else. But it doesn't sound like it's a good fit here because we're for this. And that's a really empowering conversation, I think, for both parties to say, let's be really honest and really upfront about what each of us are after right here. And if it's not aligned, then like, love you, wish you the best, but please let's move on to a place that does align with you.
And that takes the emotion out of it too, right? And that emotion is going to sweep you away from logic. As soon as those emotion hormones, that adrenaline's flowing, you're not thinking with your smart brain anymore. You're thinking with your survival brain. And that survival brain does not make strategic choices. But you can have that cordial, loving conversation about whether this person's goals can be met in this community without an emotional component other than maybe compassion or curiosity even. That would be my next step after making sure that we all know what the shared values and behavioral norms are in the community. Next step is to start diagnosing what's behind this behavior.
I actually want to pause real quick on your from this community. Something that a lot of early community managers might be attracted to is, let's just say, whatever the behavior is this person did, DMing behind the community manager's back. Like they're like, okay, great, I got to just strengthen the code of conduct. And so they just start adding like bullet points of no DMing about the community manager behind their back. Like they get like those really specific points, right? Yeah. And it's like, you're like, I wonder like what happened there. So it sounds like that's not what you're saying. Can you just help us out and tell us, what do you advise in this scenario?
Yeah, I've actually been through that exact approach in my earliest years of doing community work, where I was like, what's going to keep me from ever having to deal with this crisis again? If I make very specific rules that will prevent it forever. And was that a mistake? Yes.
How can I make sure I never have to have a hard conversation again?
Yeah. Like retconning my own work almost. So starting with values and starting with what you're hoping to accomplish should always be the first step when you're like, okay, well, let me back up. Communities very rarely start with a clear design, right? Generally, communities come together and we start establishing norms very organically in a very interactive way, in a way that does frequently involve some conflict or disagreement, right? And it's a process of parsing out like doesn't belong, does belong, doesn't belong, does belong. This is one of the ways that like a lot of people don't recognize on Reddit that moderators are community leaders, because what they're doing is saying this content does not belong in this community. This content does belong in this community, and therefore leading the community toward the kinds of interactions that people are looking for, right? And at some point, you all get together and you're like, okay, let's write this down so everyone knows what belongs here, what doesn't belong here. Focusing on what doesn't belong is a trap, because focusing on what doesn't belong gets you into the weeds in a way that is never productive. And you end up with this arm-long, this like IRS instruction manual of how to community that no one will read, and people will invariably find loopholes in. Do not fall into this trap. Go the other direction. Go to, this is the community we're building. We're building a community that is welcoming, that is friendly, that is fun, that is productive, collaborative, whatever. Describe the community that you want, and then cite, so because this is what we want, we don't do this. And make that a little flexible so that you can capture the edge cases as they apply, right? And so the rules really should be fairly broad and they should always link back to the goals of the community, to the values of the community. This is what we believe. This is what we're building toward. So We do this, we don't do that. And bonus points for any rule that you can write that is positively framed rather than negatively framed. Because then when you're reaching out and you're like, hey, that didn't match our guideline, you can say, this is what we're looking for. This is what you did. Can you shift to what we're looking for? Yes or no?
This podcast is sponsored by Ember Consulting, where I'm the founder and head community creator. At Ember, we help people who are familiar with running their business on content, coaching, or consulting become community powered. As you hear in this podcast, creating a community is really tough and managing it can be even harder. So don't do it alone. Whether you're looking to launch a new community or pivot your strategy, our one-on-one consulting helps you skip the learning curve and do it right the first time. And when you're ready to belong to a space just for community creators learning, testing, and growing their communities together, check out the Ember community. Now, back to the episode. That is such good wisdom and such a helpful tool. The term that's coming to mind for me and what you're saying too that I've found is really helpful in writing these is like the spirit of the community. So rather than getting so hung up on all the black and white rules of yes and no, really centering your community on what is the spirit of what we hope to build here. And you can go pretty far with that gray space in conversations around conflict of, hey, I get your intention. It was over here, but like the reality is that this is the impact and this is the spirit of our community. And this doesn't align with the spirit of what we're building. So I think we actually have a lot more agency in that type of language. You don't need to arm yourself with all of these rigid guidelines and rules when really, as quote, the protector of the community, your job is to bring forth the spirit of the community, not to just enforce the things people aren't supposed to do.
And another point in that framing of this is what we're building toward, this is our city on the hill, these are the values that take us there, that allows for creativity and expansiveness. So new people who are coming in don't see no, they see yes, this direction. And so that really allows you to morph and evolve the community based on trends or who's coming in next or how the industry is changing or anything according to your values, rather than having to constantly be controlling people. And it's so much more fun to encourage the good out of people rather than try to stamp out the bad.
Oh, it's good. It's the rules of improv 101. If you've ever sat in an improv, I actually used to make my community managers go to an improv class with me. They probably hated me for this. But it's such good wisdom, though, the yes and the movement towards positive language and like reframing things in a way that brings collaboration and creativity and opens people up rather than shuts them down. And these are all skills that take time to develop. And I'm sure I can list just as many ways that I have not lived out this way as a community builder. But that's a great goal aspirationally and also practically some ways to get there. Thank you for sharing that. What was your third point? I cut you off. You were starting to talk.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about your third point for this letter.
So the other thing that really stood out to me about the situation is that it doesn't sound like our source understands what's motivating this toxic community member. Because unless you know what your conflict partner is trying to accomplish, you're not going to be able to really engage with them in any productive way. So I call this phase the diagnostic phase of like really getting in there. And this is a place where I will encourage some private one-to-one contact, preferably as close as you can get. So if you have the budget to fly where she is, see her in person. If you can just pull her into a video call, that too. Don't do a one-to-one video call. If you can, get another community manager with you to take notes, because that is just safeguarding you as far as transparency and making sure that nothing can be said that wasn't true. But you got to learn like what's behind her behavior. What is she trying to accomplish? What does she think she needs? You don't need to agree with someone to understand where they're coming from. But without understanding her goals and motivations, you're never going to be able to form a strategic plan for how to address her behavior. And as much as it can be scary to connect with someone who is big and grandstandy and loud in person, honestly, 9 times out of 10, when you're one-to-one with that person, they're usually a little softer than you would expect. But once you understand what their beef is and what they want for themselves, that's where you can start figuring out, like, is there any world in which they can get what they want or close to what they want? Can you redirect her energy in the direction of what the community is trying to accomplish? Or do you need to find a way to graciously and compassionately explain to her, that's never going to be available. I'm so sorry. What do you want to do about this? And just figure out, is there a carrot you can give her for good behavior? Can you set up a system where if you're looking for more visibility, if you're looking for more respect, people who engage in the community in this way could become mentors, could become star contributors, something like this. If you're looking for more influence in the community, people who engage in this way get to meet our executives once a year, or people who engage in this way get to have more influence. You're not influencing us in a good way right now, by the way. So sometimes finding out what they're looking for, you can give them a comp and then draw the path of acceptable behavior that would get them to that goal that would be close enough.
I love all of this. I like to say the degree of separation between your community nemesis and your community leader is like 2 degrees. I think that's so empowering for community managers who are listening. Like if you have these really troublesome members, I like to say they are contributing so much energy into your community. Like actually, your actual nemesis is the person who's like not showing up and not contributing anything. It's so much easier to shift them 2 degrees than it is to get somebody who has zero activity going on, like getting the wheels turning for them. That will take you way more energy than if you can actually sit down and have that hard conversation and shift that person's behavior literally just 2 degrees into something like super positive for the whole community. I love your call for us to like embrace those spaces and to be brave to go into them, because that's a really scary place when somebody's like coming at you and going behind your back to address that head on and say, I'm going to hop on a plane to come see you. We're going to get dinner with this other community manager because I want to know how you're clearly not getting the support that you're seeking in this community. And I want to know how we can make that happen. Like that's so meaningful and so brave. I love everything you shared. I think that's so wise and speaks to probably a lot of difficult conversations that you've had in your time as a community manager as well.
Yeah, I call it getting inside their strike zone. So if someone's trying to fight with you and you actually embrace them and get inside, get closer to them, it becomes impossible to fight you because you're so close together. And by pulling someone toward you and toward the goal you're working in, they become associated with your goals. And therefore, dragging you down drags them down too. So the closer you can get to your loudest critics, as much as possible, if there's any chance to bring them closer, that is the most expedient way forward.
I really love that. There's another line that I like to use in these scenarios when I'm in that conversation and in that embrace, which is, I don't think you know how strong your voice is and how much people value your opinion in this community. The things that you say really matter and people take them to heart. And so we want to partner with you because your voice really matters in this community. And right now it's causing a lot of damage. And we see a path where you can use your voice to actually create some amazing change in this community. So, but just starting with that piece of their position in the community, acknowledging the power of their voice and inviting them to partner with you rather than being this adversary. So good. Well, do you have any parting advice for our toxic member in Toronto as we sign off on this episode?
We've had a lot of highfalutin, idealistic ideas here. And I do want to acknowledge that sometimes the person really is a toxic sociopath and needs to get out. It's true. That does happen. And sometimes these toxic folks are very clever and toxic and are skirting the perfect code of conduct just right. And you can't call them on anything. And it's really frustrating. And in those situations, that's when we bring the vacuum into play, right? Where we shift our attention away from the negative behavior and we put a lot of attention on positive examples in the community. And that's when we lift up bright and up and coming people who do have a positive effect, who do make the community welcoming and fun. That's when we increase the signal around positive behavior in a way that drowns out the noise of negative behavior to prepare for that loud exit that is probably coming, right? And there's already noise, there's already good music playing, right? When the screechy music of a loud exit is happening in the background. And so at that point, fill up your space with good stuff to just really have some momentum going to get through that storm.
Yeah, drown it out and keep your community in general focus on the positive and focus on the good that's happening in the community so that they don't weigh down. They don't drag the community along with them as they exit.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
It's really good. Ooh, I love that tool. Okay, so to fight a fire, you can fight fire with fire, you can fight it with water, or you can fight it with a vacuum. I am going to take that with me today.
Do it. It's so helpful.
Wonderful. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your very hard-earned wisdom on this episode. I really appreciate it. And thank you for making the space a little less lonely. I'm sure as community managers, when we enter into these places or have these fiascos unfold in our community, it's so easy to feel like we're the only ones or that we've done something wrong. And while there's always things that we can do to learn and be better, I think it's so relatable just to hear the stories and know that it happens a lot of different places. So thank you for being brave enough to share about it here.
I appreciate you making a space for people to hear that they're not alone and they can get through this too. Good work there.
Wonderful. All right. Catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for sharing some space with me on this episode. Please like and review wherever you find your podcasts. To submit your own community conundrum, fiasco, or other drama, go to the link in the show notes. Aloha and catch you next time.